How are we doing today? Today we're going to go over the table saw. This is one of the major tools you'll be using here, and we want to go over some of the previous tools, mainly the joiner and the planer you used prior to coming here. So what we need to understand on the table saw is our wood. We need to understand with the grain and across the grain. On the table saw, you do not do freehand sawing. You must use either the fence or you must use the miter gauge. And we don't use them together. It's the miter gauge or the fence. And we'll be going over that. So here's a board, and this is with the grain, this is across the grain, and this is end grain. All right? When you are cutting the board and you're going with the grain, we use the fence. When we're going across the grain, we want to use the miter gauge. There are a couple special techniques that we'll go over on a different time that you can do with the table saw. But we're going to go over the basic ripping and cross-cutting with the table saw. So before you go to the table saw, you must get one clean edge. So you have to have previously gone to the joiner. So here's a board, and I was going to get this to a set size. Let's just say I want to make this board 5 inches by 11 inches. So the first thing you need to do is join an edge, rip to width, square one end, and then cut it to length. You want to remember that sequence. So I'm going to throw in another term, it's called rough cut. So I have a long board, I go over and I rough cut it. Usually we'll use the radial arm saw. It's easier to use. And then again, join an edge, rip to width, square one end, cut to length. And then you'll have a board that's true size and shape. And this is the machine we'll be using to do that. So what I want to do is go over the different hand wheels here. We have this tilts the blade. So here I am turning the blade, so the arbor has now moved and we're at 11 degrees. I'm going to bring it back to 0. And on this side, if you'll watch from here, what I can do is raise the blade up. Rule of thumb. What we want to do is raise the blade so it is a 1/4 inch or just 1 tooth above the wood. There are some exceptions. For example, if I was doing a plywood laminate veneer, I want to raise it up a little higher so I don't have chip out. But 90% of the time what you'll be doing is we only want to have 1 tooth. You don't want to have the blade way up. Now you're endangering cutting yourself. This is very, very dangerous. You're going to notice that we don't have a guard on. This is called a saw stop. Won't be demonstrating this, but actually if I was going to touch the blade before it would cut me, it would shut off. And this is what goes on this. This mechanism here will stop the blade. It's pretty amazing. What I'd like you to do is go online and look at saw stop and you'll see it. We don't do this because this is pretty expensive, but it's a lot cheaper than cutting your thumb off. So we don't have the guard on this machine. Now, because it's sensitive to your moisture, we also have to check. So if we have any wood that is damp, we check it, and we don't use the machine. If it is damp, we don't want to use glues in it. So there's some things we really won't cut on this because it will affect the blade. It will shut it down. So here we go. We are going to one tooth or 1/4 inch. And then over here is a tape, so I can move this and set it so there I am at 5 inches. At home, it's always good to check your measurement in the front and the back of the blade to see if the fence is parallel to it. This is very accurate. And when you're measuring there, if you notice, there's different blades. And the teeth will go one way and then the other way. So when you are lining up, you want to look at the teeth. You want a tooth that's pointed this way. This is very accurate. We have this set. If it's off a little bit, let me know and I will readjust it. Let's see how the blade is actually attached on here. This is your table insert. We're going to take it off. So here you have your blade, and there's an arbor, which is a shaft. My finger is touching the arbor. You can see the threads, and this is the nut. The teeth on the blade need to point towards you. They should not point away because the blade is spinning at you. This is a splitter guard, and what that does is it prevents the wood, when ripping, from pinching back on the blade. That occurs, sometimes you'll get a kickback. This is the dust collection system for the table saws. Unlike the joiner and the planer, some of the other ones, there's no way to open and close this. So the dust collection system has to be on outside. It usually is, but you want to make sure that it is on. You can hear that. Check the orientation video and you'll see how to turn it on outside. And if you haven't seen that yet, shame on you. I've made all my adjustments and I am ready to cut. Again, eye safety, and you want to have ear protection on. When ripping, depending on the width of the board, if I'm doing something that's very narrow, I must use push sticks. Right here, I am 5 inches, so I can actually use my hand. Some of you will feel comfortable, some of you won't. Some of you will want to use a push stick. So what I am going to do is, with my one hand, similar to the joiner, I want the board against the fence. I'm also holding it down. When you initially start to cut, sometimes the wood's going to want to lift on you. So I'm holding it down and in. Sometimes you need an extra hand. And just like the joiner, what we did is we used a feather board. And what that would do is it now pushes the wood in. So for example, if I had a longer board and I'm cutting it, the feather board is going to be very helpful. Sometimes when you're cutting long boards, you want to have somebody help you. So now I am ready to cut. I've done all my adjustments. I don't have any scrap around, and I'm working on an anti-skid material. So when I make my cut, what I want to do is I am going to push the wood until the end of the wood is past the back of the blade. Never let go of the wood while it is between the fence and the blade. It gets bound, it's going to come out. So I am going to stand just slightly to the left of the wood. Let me show you with a piece of wood. Right here, I've cut the piece of wood in half. This piece is free. Do not let go of this wood. You want to pass it all the way. When you're cutting and I'm watching your demo, you're going to hear me say, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Good. The wood is past, you can let go. If you let go here, the vibration and it hits that blade, it can come flying out. You don't want to be standing here. This is called a kickback. You want to allow the wood to clear. This is like a bullet coming out. You do not want to get hit with the wood. If someone is cutting, it is not very good also to come behind them. Wait until they're done and then pass. You want to avoid getting hit by a kickback. And while cutting, you want to avoid having a kickback. So you're going to clear right here, then I can let go. When we turn on the saw stop, we want to turn it on You'll have the light, it will be solid. Then you're ready to go. So now I can pull this out and it will go. And I can use my leg, my knee, to hit that off. That's why this button is so big. Sometimes, as this is blinking, this one might be blinking and the sensors are not on right. So it won't turn on. So sometimes I might have to come over and adjust something. But so we have a solid light, it is ready to go. And again, all I have to do is pull this out. How I get stuck, I can use my knee. So if my hands are up here and I'm in trouble, I don't let go of the wood, I can turn that off with my knee. You want to be comfortable when cutting. What I like to do is I've always put a finger over here just so I'm running it along with the fence. I could hold it right here. This hand, my left hand, is going to hold the board in. It doesn't move. This hand comes away. I keep cutting all the way. The wood is cut, but I'm going to keep going until the back of the wood passes the back of the blade. Do not touch that until the blade totally stops. Now I can remove that scrap. If I was cutting several pieces, I could just leave that and go with the next piece and it will just slide it out. So now what I've just done is I've ripped this board now, this edge and this edge are parallel. So now what I would be doing is I would come with my miter gauge and I'm going to square one end. You do not use the fence when cross-cutting, so I am going to remove the fence. You notice I have my push stick and wood on this side of the fence. That is okay. We never have wood on this side of the fence because it can vibrate and come into the blade. So now all I'm going to do is I am just going to line this up, and all I want to do is take a little bit off. And what that is, just squaring it. So this edge and this edge will be at 90 degrees. I can pull it off and come back. So now we have two parallel edges and one end that is squared. So that is at 90 degrees. So I'm going to measure from this end over. I am going to do 11¼ inches. Now I've put it on the top of the board. Really where I want it is to be is on the edge. So now what I am going to do is I am going to line up the blade, and what I want is, again, one tooth this way, one tooth that way. I am going to touch it to a tooth that is pointed right to the line. We don't want to touch the line or cut the line, we want to just touch it. And again, before I was using Sharpie, on this I want a pencil. I want a really, really fine point. We don't want a really wide line because you'll be off a 64th. So now what I can do is, pull it back, never turn the machine on when the wood is in contact with the blade. So I'm holding that, turn it on, wait till it come up to speed, and now slowly go down. Pull it away and come back. So now I have a board that is true size and shape. So now I can go and do joinery or whatever I need to do next. Now I'm going to put a bevel on the wood. So I am going to tilt the arbor. I'm going to go back to my 11 degrees. So what I've done is I've tilted the arbor, which is what the blade sits on, or sits in, and I'm at 11 degrees, and I'm 1 tooth above. So now I can come back. Now, there are some tricks that you can do. If we can come back in and look, sometimes I will draw on here, and that line right there, I don't know if you can see it, but that lines up with that edge of the blade, all right? And sometimes what I'll do is I'll make a cut, don't move the wood, come back and draw on the table with pencil. And then I have a mark that I can come over, and I'll show you that trick a little later. What we're gonna do is a bevel cut. I'm not gonna line up, I'm just gonna cut it. Do you notice that I didn't put my head down? I don't bend down. The wood's still there. As long as there's not pressure on that, that won't fly back. If I was using the fence, that board could come flying back. So never, if there's a piece of wood there, stick your head down here. You always want to know where this is, and again, you can turn it off with your knee. So now what I have is I have a bevel cut. So now I have an angle of 11 degrees. Now I'm going to do a joint. Before I come over here, I should have done this at the workbench, but in the demo purchase, so what I would do is I would measure. I want to come up, and I'm just going to say a number, 2 inches. And then the board that's going to fit in there, this board is going to fit in this dado. So I could take this, line it up, mark it. I always like to measure it and then do my measurement. It's always good to hone your skills on measuring. So now I have where the joint is going to go. But what I need to do is square that down. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise up the blade to the height that I'm going to come into the wood. And I've just marked it. Rule of thumb, never go more than halfway into the wood. So on your joints, if I go more than halfway into this, it's going to weaken the wood. All right? I just want it so the board will be able to sit in there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise up the blade to my mark. And what you want to do, the blade is round. I want to get at the highest point. So if I check down here, I'm going to show you. This isn't the measurement you want. You want it right up here, right at the highest level. So I have my line, and what I'm going to do is bring the blade down. I'm going to look at that tooth. Bingo. So now what I am going to do, everything comes off the table. I am now going to line it up. Now, this tooth is for this line. The other one, so that's the line I'm going. So now I'm going to show you a trick. I've showed you here. I can line that up, bring the board back, don't let it move, and turn it on. I'm going to show you how we can mark where the blade is on the table. I'm taking a piece of scrap wood. Do not let it move. And I turn it off. So now, with a pencil, I have now marked on the table where that blade exactly is. So I can take my board that I have my marks on, and what I can do is line it right up there, and I know my cut will be perfect. Now, that's this side of the blade, not that side. So what I would do then is go back and set the height of my blade. So I've lined up the mark on the table with my mark on the board. That's one method, or I can come up and again, make sure I'm getting a tooth that's pointing in the right direction. So either or method, you're gonna find what works best for you. So I'm lined up. What I wanna do is make sure I'm holding the board. If I let go of the board and I turn this on, a little vibration, this thing moves. So now I'm not real accurate. So again, I pull back, hold the board, and then turn it on. So I'm gonna double check my mark, hold it, turn on, and now I'm holding the wood down and in and pushing forward. So now what I am gonna do is go and make another cut. Now I am right by my line, and the line I have, my cheat line, is for tooth going this way. I now have to line it up with a tooth over here. Sometimes when you do this, you go over and now you have the thickness of the blade too much on your cut. So now I've stopped the machine, I'm gonna come over, I'm gonna line it up. So now I have my dado joint, and that board will fit right in there. And I can go and clean this up just a little bit. So this is a dado joint. We also have a rabbet joint. We're not going to go into the joinery. That's a whole nother session. So again, let's review this. What we did was we're at the joiner, we jointed an edge, we ripped the width, we squared an end, we cut the length, and then I can go and place in my joints. What I'm going to show you now is actually how to do, well, this is called a miter gauge. I can turn it so I can get angles. Here we're going to cut at 30 degrees. I've locked it in place. I have my blade, so it's one tooth above. I'll line up the corner where I'm cutting on an inside tooth, pull the board back, hold it, turn it on. So now I have a miter. The other thing that I can do with this is I can tilt the blade, so I can do a compound cut on this. So I'm going to go down, I'm going to raise the blade up, and now what I am doing is tilting to 15 degrees. I want to set my height of my blade. Line it up. So now, not only do I have here was just the 30 degrees, but now I have a 15 degree angle here. So that's a compound angle. A little review on the table saw, all right? You need to join an edge. You need to have one edge and one surface clean before you come here. So we join an edge, rip to width. That's the fence. We never rip using the miter gauge, okay? The miter gauge is for cross-cutting. We never use the fence and the miter gauge at the same time. There is a way to do that, but I will show you that, and it's really not using them. It's setting up a stop block, and that's another session. So we are clear area. We have our eye safety. We have our ear protection. When you are cutting and you're using the fence, there's no scrap on the table. It can be on the other side of the fence. And then, of course, when using the miter gauge, nothing on the table. The table saw is a great machine. This is the saw stop. So some of you might be looking at that going, why don't we have the guard in place? Because this machine is set so you cannot get hurt on it. I look forward to seeing you in class.